If you keep up on literary trends, then you've probably heard the name George Saunders. The story that we're going to be talking about today is from this collection here, CivilWarLand in Bad Decline. And it's a short story that I haven't really seen explored too often, but it's one of the greatest short stories I've ever read. The story is called Isabel, and we're just going to start with the first page. Now, this video will serve as a little bit of a preview for the entire story, as well as how you really should approach the beginning of a story when you go to read it, whether it's a short story, a play, a novel, anything. There's a few things that you want to keep in mind as you start reading. The first thing is you really want to keep track of the characters. This is a really difficult thing for a lot of people, me included. So often now I will take a mental note when I read something about who is who. Other times I'll actually jot it down either in the margins of my book or on a separate notebook. Really early on in stories, a lot of times, the author introduces so many new characters. They're all new because you're just beginning the story. So you want to keep track of who the protagonist is, if there's a narrator, how they fit into the story, and all the other characters as well. And when I say keep track of, I mean make mental notes about specific nicknames certain characters have, ages of characters, relationships between characters, occupations. A lot of this is subconscious, but if you can consciously think of the fact that you want to track certain characters as you read, it'll make it a lot easier. And so I'm going to pause as I read through this first page a few times just to talk about different things here and there. Also, one way that you can keep track of characters, or anything really, is just underline, circle, right in the margin of your book or on your pad, like a notebook or a yellow legal pad. That's what I like to use. Some people are afraid to write in their books, but I've always liked to do it. In fact, I'll do a whole video on that eventually, but let's just get into it. The first great act of love I ever witnessed was Split Lip bathing his handicapped daughter. So already we have met three characters in this story. I'm going to go through and underline them now. The first one is I, that's our narrator or our protagonist in this story. We also have Split Lip, which we're going to learn a lot about as it progresses. And we have the handicapped daughter, who is very important to the story. We were young, ignorant of mercy, and called her boneless or balled up Gumby for the way her limbs were twisted and useless. That's so mean. She looked like a newborn colt, appendages folded in as she lay on the velour couch, protected by guardrails. Now, one thing that I also think is important if you want to increase your vocabulary is to circle or highlight or underline, make some kind of mark of words that are unfamiliar to you. Now, in my head, I'm picturing my students that I teach, which is anywhere from 9th grade to 12th grade. And so that word velour, that would be a word I would stop and ask if anybody knew what it meant. So for now, we're going to go back to it. I'm just going to circle the word velour, and we'll go back to that. Leo and I stood outside the window on cinder blocks, watching. All right, and there's our fourth character we're going to meet on this first page. Like I said, there's a lot of characters here. A lot of times you meet them rapid fire, and like I said, it's hard to keep track of, but this is how you do it. So we have the narrator, we have Split Lip, who's a father, we have the handicapped daughter, and now we have Leo. And the narrator and Leo are standing on cinder blocks, looking through the window into Split Lip's house. And he's witnessing the first great act of love that he ever saw. She was scared of the tub, so to bathe her, Split Lip covered the couch with a tarp and caught the runoff in a bucket. Miss Split Lip was gone, unable to bear the work boneless required. That's so sad. The other parent ran off because it was too difficult to take care of the handicapped daughter. She found another man, and together they made a little blonde beauty they dressed in red velvet and paraded up and down the aisle at St. Caspian's, while Split Lip held boneless against him in the last pew, shushing her whenever the music overcame her and she started making horrible moaning noises, trying to sing along. There's already so much going on here. We have this handicapped girl who has been abandoned by her mother, and now her father, who's known as Split Lip, for some reason, we'll find out why, takes care of her solely. And as this is going on, we have the narrator and someone named Leo looking through the window and witnessing this pure act of love, this selfless act of love. Now, what I want to do is go back into this first page real quick and talk about something that I think is kind of interesting. Now, I want to go back to that word velour. Velour is a word that means a certain kind of fabric or material. It's often known as the poor man's velvet. That's because although it does have a shimmery kind of quality, it's a lot cheaper to make, a lot cheaper to produce, and just overall, it's a cheaper fabric. Now, let's look at a line toward the bottom of the first page and see if we can find any deeper meaning here with the word velour. So if we look down here, we see the word velvet. Now, we all know what velvet is. Velvet is a expensive type of material. It looks very nice. I mean, not everybody likes it, but, you know, I think we can objectively say it's a nice material. The contrast between these two words and how they're assigned to two completely different characters. One, you have the cheaper fabric associated with this girl who has a horrible handicap, and the other, velvet, is associated with a blonde beauty, a child that we can assume doesn't have any kind of birth defect or ailment. And this comparison here, this contrast, really supports one of the underlying messages of this short story, which is that a lot of times people struggle with understanding those that are different from them. And right here on the first page, you can see it's right there. So if you're interested in writing, or maybe you just are interested in learning how to read more in depth, one thing that I would suggest or point out is that there's so much that you can do and so much that you can pick up on when you read the first page or write the first page of a story. This writer, George Saunders, he introduced 4 characters. Actually, more if you count the mother who abandoned Boneless and the blonde beauty that she winds up conceiving. You can do so much on the first page. You can introduce multiple characters. You can assign nicknames, interesting character traits, character backgrounds. But also, with your diction or word choice, you can really help support the theme that you're going for in your own writing. And if you're just reading, the same thing applies. Pay attention to the first page of any story that you start to read, whether it's a novel or a short story, whatever. Really pay attention to the words that an author chooses. So that's about as far as I wanted to get with this video here. I don't want to spoil anything because I really think if you haven't read this story, you really should on your own. And I will say that every time I've read this story, I have welled up with tears. That's not an exaggeration. That's 100% the truth. I wouldn't be making a video about it if I didn't feel this way. And what I'll say too is that there is a little bit of violence partway through the story, and just there's some awful subject matter, I do have to admit, but the ending really will make you feel something. But I don't want to spoil it. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch me talk about literature. And as always, read on.